Welcome to the Happy Mama Movement podcast. I'm Amy Taylor-Kabbaz. I would like to start by acknowledging the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation on which this podcast is recorded as the traditional custodians of this land, and pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. And as this podcast is dedicated to the wisdom and knowledge of motherhood, I would like to acknowledge the mothers of this land, the elders, their wisdom, their knowing, and my own elders and teachers. Welcome to another one of our MAMAQ episodes where one of our amazing coaching trainers inside the Mama Rising certification joins me live as we listen to one of your questions that you have submitted about any part of your life, really, about matrescence, motherhood, marriage, anything in between. Today, I am joined by the amazing Linda Anderson. Linda has been a life coach for nearly 20 years, working with mothers exclusively for about 10. She is a mama herself of 3 girls, 14, 12 and 10 now, and has trained coaches and is obviously now one of our trainers inside our coaching school. Thank you for joining me, Linda.
Thank you for having me.
This question we have that has been sent through by Kate, I have to say we got 3 different versions of this question from 3 different mothers. 3 different versions of asking, what about teenagers? What about later in life? And as someone who is a mama of 14, 12 and 10-year-old girls, I knew you would be the perfect one to talk to about this. I think I'm going to learn some things in this conversation. But first, let's listen to what she had to say.
Okay.
Hello, my name's Kate and I have a question about the lifespan of matrescence. So I understand that matrescence is something that can be really helpful to understand your experience when you first become a mum. But what about when you have teenage kids? How could I use matrescence as a lens through which to understand how I'm feeling with teenage children? I know, Amy, you have teenage children, so I'd love to hear some practical examples of how you use matrescence to live well with teenage kids. And I wonder just what your opinion is on the lifespan of matrescence. Okay, I look forward to hearing from you.
Oh, it's such a good question and something we talk about.
Question.
Yeah, it's something we talk about a lot in the training of this definition of matrescence in terms of a timeline. I'll start by answering very practically straight away that I learnt the theory and understanding of matrescence from Dr. Aurelie Athen at Columbia University, and I asked her a similar question in the work I started to do with her many years ago, and her answer was, we don't really have a defining timeline of matrescence yet because we're still very much understanding what this is. She said, but if you ask me personally, matrescence never ends. And I think that's, top line answer. That's how I feel about it. What about you, Linda?
100%. And I was just reflecting as I was listening to that about the definition that you use within Mama Rising about matrescence, and I'm not going to get this word for word, but in essence, what you say is that matrescence is the transformation of a woman as she moves through motherhood. And that word through is really critical to me because it's not just moving into motherhood. It's not just having a new baby, the early months or the first 12 months. Moving through motherhood includes moving through motherhood with teenagers.
Yeah.
And beyond. We haven't got to beyond yet, but I just think it keeps unfolding. We keep unfolding through this.
And that's the key. Yeah. I think Kate's words are so beautiful. How can matrescence help me understand what's happening now I have teenagers, is basically what she's asking. She said how to live well with teenagers within myself. It was a beautiful word. I know. Yeah, how do we do that?
I'd like, how could I live well with my teenager?
But if we do use the lens of matrescence, so basically what we mean by that is matrescence is an understanding, as you said, of the transformation we experience as we move through being a mama. And really, as we all know, motherhood is not a static experience. You don't get to a point and it just stays the same. And the lens of matrescence, the understanding of matrescence, allows us to understand that that means we too will continue to change in our role. Our identity will change. How we feel about work will change. How we feel about our body, our relationships, the world. All of this continues to change as our experience of motherhood changes.
Absolutely. And I know that for me, one of the core elements of my own matrescence journey, and so even before I knew that's what I was experiencing, it's always been around my identity, how I see myself, who I was, who I am now. Do those things fight against each other, or do I feel at peace with the transition? And so when I think about this lens of matrescence now that I have teenagers, for me personally, it becomes that reflection of who am I now?
Yes.
In this journey within myself and also in relationship to my children. And how is that evolving? And how do I remain with a sense of peace in that? Because that's the most powerful thing that matrescence has given me. The knowledge of matrescence is I've stopped fighting myself. I've stopped struggling to remain who I was, who I believed I should be. And I can be more accepting of the changes and observing them and going, gosh, how interesting. One of my favorite words, how interesting that now that I'm in this phase of motherhood, I see myself like this. Yeah.
That's right. And really, the gift of this word, of this theory, is that this is not something we are automatically. We don't always automatically know who we are or how to deal with the next stage of motherhood. Just as Dana Raphael, who first coined the word matrescence, said, as she defined it back in the 70s, that this is the time where a woman is becoming a mother. There's this becoming period. And so if we're looking at it that way, then at every stage we're becoming a different version of who we need to be. But we've never done this before. We've never been a parent of this teenager before, even if we've been a parent to another teenager. At every stage, it's new, and we don't necessarily know how to do this, what to feel about it, stuff it up. We try the wrong things. We do all of that. And as you said, this theory gives us so much grace and kindness and compassion for ourselves that this is a new version of motherhood I am trying to understand here and give ourselves a little bit more grace around that.
And the other element when we're talking about teenagers is, of course, they are going through, right, their own massive
adolescence.
Hello. So they are going through. Now, admittedly, theirs has an endpoint, thank goodness. But so not only are we navigating our own shifts and changes, we're also holding the space for these young human beings having their own first experience of transition. And I think in some ways it's so beautiful because I know for myself, I think I hold more empathy and compassion for my daughters through the lens of matrescence, through the lens that I've given myself of kindness and compassion. And I think that helps me hold their space more kindly than maybe I would have.
True. Yes, I completely agree with that because of the opportunity I've had to really look at how I'm changing, be kind with myself, realign myself to who I want to be, and not just assume I'm going to go back to who I used to be. All of those practices I've used over the last 15 years now has absolutely made me, I believe, more able to be present with the adolescent version of identity changes that we experience. It is very much one of the best parenting tools I think we can have going into adolescence, is to have done some of this for ourselves. Yeah, absolutely. The other thing that I think is really great for us to explore and perhaps explain a bit, Linda, is this idea of the cascade of motherhood, as we call it in Mama Rising, which is wherever in your life you first feel these changes of who you are, because either you're wanting to have a baby, you've just found out you're pregnant, maybe you've just had a baby, and you're starting to recognize, oh, this is different than I thought it would be, or my friends feel different now, or I didn't feel the same way about my job all of a sudden. No matter where it starts, it is inevitable that it will cascade into all the different areas of your life, as we like to say. Matrescence touches all parts of you, every single part of your identity, your physical self, your hormonal self, your brain, your relationships, how you view the world, will all be viewed differently once you enter matrescence. I think it's really great, perhaps, for us to remember that when we're going into the teenage years or whatever next stage of motherhood we're entering, is to again remind ourselves that perhaps this is a chance for us to look at all of those areas. I think sometimes we are okay with the changes in our children and how we parent them, but it's the changes in other parts of our life that are the harder ones. Like, for example, what I'm thinking of here, you think that by the time they're teenagers, you may have more freedom. They would be more independent by now, that you would be, a lot more carefree, or maybe there's more money by now, or holidays would be different, or there's some things that you were holding on to that you thought would be a particular way when you get to these stages of parenthood. And it's not. It's different than you thought. Or perhaps your marriage hasn't changed the way you thought it would by now. Or your career still doesn't feel the way you thought it would. And the lens of matrescence allows us to understand that everything is connected, and each of these stages is a chance for us to look at these areas of our life and redefine them, perhaps look at them, reflect on them, and decide who you are at this time of your life again.
I just had this funny image of a 1970s toy that I don't even know is real. Maybe I'm muddling up a few different toys, because it started with the kaleidoscope. You look through them like, that's not the toy I want. But I'm actually thinking there was like a plastic camera, and it had like a wheel that you would rotate, and it had different coloured,
it was real
cellophane. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm kind of imagining, this cascade of motherhood and matrescence being like that toy, and that you flick to the next colour and you look at what's on the other side through that lens, through that colour, and then we flick it again and go, oh, it's different now. And yet what's on the other side is the same, whether it be work, relationships, whatever. But we flick it around so we see it through a different lens. I don't know what that offers us other than, it's continually changing. It's a continually different perspective. But there's something in that, I think.
There is. I think what it offers us is a reminder that we have to, the way I see this in my mind, thank you for that beautiful image, is that we have to keep scrolling through and have a look at all these different areas, because often we sort of focus in on parenting and think, oh, everything else is fine over here. And actually, no, it's the whole wheel that we have to check in with. We might be feeling great about how we're raising our teenagers, and we're not looking over here to see how we're feeling about our own worthiness in the world, or our own joy and fun and freedom that we thought we'd have back by now, and actually we don't at all. This is the opportunity of matrescence, I think, is that it's an acknowledgement that we are always changing and evolving. And each time our children change and evolve, we in turn will need to change and evolve. And that's okay. It's actually a good thing. And secondly, we will never go back to who we were. And I feel, perhaps in a very long-winded way, what I was trying to say is, as a parent of teenagers, and in particular of a teenager who has needed so much more support than I ever expected, the lens of matrescence has allowed me to not be attached to the way I thought it would be, or my expectations of what it would mean for me. I've had to really redefine what this time in my life looks like in terms of the time and energy that parenting still is needed from me. And what does that mean for my career, my relationships, my health, myself, all of that.
And we often talk, in the work that we do about the gap between the expectations that we hold of a particular time in our life and then whatever is served up in reality, and whatever that gap in between is where we are at risk of feeling trauma, tension, pain, all
resentment,
those sorts of things.
anger,
all of it. And so, our ability to let go of some of that expectation and be more accepting of it just being as it is, and knowing that that's okay, immediately reduces that gap and reduces the of everything that sits in the middle,
That's it.
Yeah.
And allowing ourselves to grieve that it wasn't what we thought it would be. It didn't live up to that story, or that it is more challenging than we thought, or one particular child isn't able to, do something that they were hoping to. Whatever it looks like, I think in our work, a lot of what we talk about as well is allowing ourselves to grieve the loss of who we used to be, and also not get too attached to the expectations of who we're going to become. So it's really sort of staying here in this moment. It is what it is. How can I do the best I can for them? But also, what does this mean for me? How have you found the matrescence of teenage daughters so far?
I feel like for me, one of the things I was saying before was that it's given me a lens and a compassion for their own transition. So that's been very powerful. I feel like also I'm just feeling so much more at peace with myself. It's like a new level of maturity of my matrescence, that it's a far more peaceful evolution, and that I'm more accepting of the fact that I am changing. Whereas, in earlier years, I really fought against the changes. And part of that comes from the teenage years, but part of that also just comes from the number of years that my brain, my body, my emotions have been integrating this knowledge. Yes, I think that makes a difference as well. And I, especially because I'm the mother of daughters, I have this huge kind of fascination with offering them a lens of me that becomes how they see the way they grow up and to be a woman, which sometimes I have to I have to let go of this sense of expectation and pressure within myself, that somehow I have this responsibility to, grow these girls into young women who know all these things that I never knew. And I have to let go of that and just say, I'm just offering new perspectives, new lenses, and whatever's there is there. So, yeah, that's a big thing for me, I think.
Yes, I agree. And I think there's, we're so aware, aren't we? We're so aware of what's out there in the big wide world. And there's a level of preparation we want to put in place for these children, our girls and our boys. And also just stepping back. I have found that a challenge to know that I've done enough. It's all good. The universe has got her back as well as my back, and everything will be okay. And imparting what I need to impart. I've found the biggest challenge for, not now, but because mine are now 15, 13 and 9, as my eldest started, entering sort of 11, 12, 13 years old, and school bullying came up. Issues around how she was feeling about herself started to emerge, especially around school friends. I really had to work on myself to not go into my own trauma story there and panic and overcomplicate things and think, oh my God, it's going to be the same thing that I experienced at school, and this is what you need to know, and this is how you have to deal with it, and really be there for her and hear her story rather than bring my own story to this. I think that has been one of the biggest challenges for me, having teenagers, is my teenage years were awful, and I so desperately don't want their teenage years to be bad, but I was bringing not just a bag of luggage, I was bringing a whole truck of luggage with me in those conversations, and I needed to learn how to not do that.
That's really big. Thinking about what else matrescence brings at this age, I was thinking the other day about, we talk a lot about how self-silencing shows up for women and how that is reflected within our matrescence journey. And my eldest daughter recently had an experience at school where up until this year, all her core subjects were in girl-only classrooms. Even though it's a co-ed school, and she's a girl who has a lot of questions about everything, and she always asks these questions, and her teachers are always saying, oh, it's so amazing that she asks all these questions, and don't ever let that stop. And I'm like, okay, I'll try. And then this year, she's suddenly in mixed classes, and she enters these classrooms with the same voice and the same questions, but suddenly there's a different reaction. Suddenly, right, there are some voices and behaviours in the classroom that made her feel little, that made her feel like she wanted to swallow her voice. And as a mother in this work, I just went, oh, this is where it begins. Oh. And what was so powerful, though, was this ability to have a conversation with her about this moment and what it could mean and how important it was not to allow this change in dynamic to shrink her voice. And she was really quite upset, initially. And so, it was great. We got to tap into a teacher at school that she has a great relationship with, and messaged and said, she just needs a bit of you got this talk. Can you have time with her? And within days, she's back in there, found the voice. She's great. But I look at that and I think, it's only because, and I'll say it is only because of the work that I have done in Matrescence and with you in Mama Rising, and these conversations about how we have taken a cultural pathway of self-silencing and now how we're undoing that. It's only because of that I could see it, name it, and give her some tools to bypass 20 years of unraveling, right? And so that's really powerful for me.
Oh, absolutely. I've got goosebumps all over my body. Imagine if that's what we could do. One of the things we say a lot is matrescence is a spiritual awakening, is an opportunity for a spiritual awakening. And what we mean by that is that we really begin to shift these core beliefs in ourselves and see things in a different way. And therefore, we then get to pass this on to the next generation. These generational stories of being the good girl and keeping silent or holding yourself back for others, or whatever it is, whatever your flavor of that is, through the lens of this matrescence work of looking at how has motherhood changed me? What does it mean for me as a woman, as a lover, as a career woman, as a friend, as a sister, as a Christian, whatever it is that you identify as? How is this changing because of my experience of motherhood? And in there, find all of these insights, and then we get to pass that on to our kids. I mean, how profound is that? Yeah, it's That's what it's all about, I think.
Yeah.
Amazing, Linda. Thank you so much. This was a really beautiful conversation and insight. Thank you.
Thank you for having me. I've enjoyed exploring this topic.
I know.
Yeah.
If you have a question you would like to send in for one of our coaching trainers and myself to answer, please jump on my website, amytaylorkabbaz.com/podcast, and a little video will pop up that asks you to send in a question for us. We would love to hear whatever you would like to ask us. Thanks again, Linda, and thanks everyone for listening. See you next week.